Hello, I want to talk about AI today. Because it's an interesting subject, an emerging and still developing subject within computer science. And I'm not going into this video with any preparation really. I feel that's the best way to get original ideas, is to intuit those ideas. It's not to refer to a book and just talk about the book. It's actually to intuitively gather all the data in my head and then just come up with my conclusions and thoughts. So obviously, going back historically, the Turing Test is the typical reference point for anybody talking about artificial intelligence or the demonstration of artificial intelligence, i.e., which means defined as a test whereby you have two computers. One of the computers is a human being, another is a machine intelligence. And if a human being on the other side if a human being can't distinguish that they are talking to an artificial intelligence, then that proves that the artificial intelligence has a malleability within its own linguistical core, as it were, to be able to fool a human being, essentially. It's a very famous test in computer science. It's well known within the computer science community. So I'm going to move into more of my own work. I have produced a very theoretical mathematics and theoretical computer science really paper on P=MP, and then applied that theoretically to artificial intelligence, which is to say I have written a paper P=MP which is based around it's a question of being able to process information in polynomial time, and this has potential applications for cryptology and password cracking, etc. Because it means P=MP is basically an information thing. It's an information saying that given enough time you can solve any kind of complex or less complex problem, basically. So let me just put that into an artificial intelligence context. The way that I have written about it in my paper is that if we can have processors, right, which basically process, i.e. quantum processors, which process the informational density that they can process is double that of your average processor, even if it's whatever core it is, then that doubles basically that's Moore's law, obviously, but the law that I've posited is quantum law of preprocessing. Now, the quantum law of preprocessing is a law which states that it's basically a doubling of Moore's law, essentially, mathematically. And I've summed that up using propositional logic, algebra. Though I do need to put it into a physics framework for it actually to be a complete paper, because otherwise it's highly theoretical mathematics. But that is the essential idea of what I'm going with. And then I've obviously developed the idea of service worker AI, which is artificial intelligence which works purely at a service level in terms of economies or states and stuff, and companies, whatever. So it's basically artificial intelligence as manufacturing process, as opposed to some idea of developing AI which is conscious. So, because I don't know why human beings have this obsession with building humanoid-like robots. This is one of the worst things about artificial intelligence. We try and make them like us. There's no point. You can't make robots. Well, not even that you can't. We shouldn't make robots that are like us, because are we predictable? Are you? I know I'm not. I'm not predictable. I mean, I have a mood disorder, so I'm emotion you know, spiraling up and down central. I'm constantly in a flux. So, but I have the benefit of having a very rational mind, highly rationally developed. I'm a very rationalist, very much a rationalist, and I would say I've got a pretty developed intellect, really. So, I think that, that so we should not look to build machinery that replicates us. I can't even think really particularly of any, well, apart from obviously modern robotics, any examples where design has reflected. Well, there are obviously, design always has to fit around us. That's the point of design. Often, a car seat, for example, it's something that's fitting around you. Any examples and numbers are any designs which are just modifications in engineering. And innovation and engineering are just, they're designed to fit around us. We shouldn't be making robots basically that are humanoid in appearance and look. I just think it's a pointless quest. And you know, when you actually take it to its dark logical conclusion, there's already people talking about sex bots, and I've read very extremely disturbing stuff about dolls in Japan. I don't want to go into the really quite murky and disgusting depths of that one. And that's just, you know, I feel physically sick talking about that. Okay, so obviously this is going to be a long video because it's diving into, obviously that last part was quite sickening, the idea of that. So next, after covering the disgusting sex robot kind of thing, let me talk about why I think sex robots are a really bad idea. I mean, people have rubber dolls and all that stuff. I really honestly don't understand why anyone would ever do such a thing. But people do that. They have these humanoid blow up doll things. But then take that a step further, you know, that's kind of like sad man or woman or whoever, just, I doubt it, a woman would never be fucking stupid enough to have a blow up doll. I'm pretty sure. That's an interesting question actually. I wonder if a woman's ever owned a blow up doll as a sex aid. Anyway, I imagine the answer is no. But beyond that, yeah, I just think it's just wrong. I'm having trouble actually summing up why it's wrong, but it's wrong. If a human, well, I mean, this touches into subject areas of the human mind which are taboo, obviously, and I think I can freely admit that I'm as a hypocrite as much as any other human being, in the sense that I consume pornography, I watch porn, and that has a place in my mind, but that's kind of disconnected. That's you know, it's a computer screen. There's a level of disconnection there. It's not it's not like you're actually using a prostitute or whatever. In a way, it's a kind of further away, kind of detached sexual thing through technology, because you're just watching, you know, people having sex. But when you actually take that to a further conclusion of, i.e., an intelligence being introduced there and sentience, now, which there obviously is already, but you know, watching it's produced by professionals, it's made in a professional manner. Obviously, you have amateurs and stuff, but anyway, there's consent there. Basically, what I'm saying is, in pornography, you have consent. There is consent between the people who are having sex to have sex. There's consent there for, so that, you know, there's no rape, basically, is what I'm saying. Sorry, I know it's a strong and horrible subject, so I will put probably trigger warnings on this video, but there's no rape involved in porn. Obviously, you have like rape scenarios. Personally, I've never watched anything like that. But yeah, I mean, when you introduce an actual living consciousness into a vessel of, whether even despite, regardless of if it's human, whenever you introduce that spark of intelligence, and obviously we're talking further down the line, then you are going into dodgy territory, basically. Because it obviously touches on questions of Descartes and the soul. I think therefore I am. It's the suggestion I'm putting forth is that if you introduce that spark of intelligence, given enough time and enough innovation, technical innovation, that will spark out of control. And what I'm saying is we have to start controlling that flame in the best possible way possible. By which I mean developing service worker artificial intelligence, which for me intuitively means we use Internet of Things, obviously, so kind of using Internet of Things and having basically like a bit like in, I love that film Interstellar, and there's helper computers and that, which basically they calculate probabilities of different scenarios, but also there's a very human element to them, which is they're just helpers, basically. They're helpers. They just provide objective information. So obviously some people say that is introducing a human element, but that is their only function. They just provide objective information with the artifice of emotion. So, which is different from an actual human. A human being, right, so this is going to go into psychological territory now. A human being has, let's talk about it from an actual high end of psychology and understanding of the brain. So in the brain we are driven as human beings by 3 different levels of the brain. We've got the R complex, and I'm not a neurologist, so I might fluff some of this, but this is kind of like a vague level description. Have the R complex. The reptilian fight and flight response is generated in that part of the brain which deals with external stimulus. I've actually talked about this in some of my own philosophical work. I've called it internal zone, meta zone, and external zone. So internal zone is the R complex. Meta zone is where the internal and external worlds meld, and the external zone is just the outside world, basically. So, and it's saying there is a fluidity between all 3 of those zones, basically, in the human imagination and the human mind. Obviously now I am deep into Descartes territory. Think is returning back to the question of think therefore you are. But where Descartes' philosophy was, I think, not rapidly, was, some people probably want to end rapidly, I guess, because I'm probably talking quite a lot. But I think where Descartes was wrong was the fact that he says, I think therefore I am, but there is also an element of humanity in which feelings are important. It's not just that spark of rational machine-like intelligence which defines it. And I know that wasn't Descartes' point. I know I've just fluffed that one a bit. Descartes' point, in fact, was that if you're aware that you exist, then you exist, basically, in the simplest possible form. That idea can be expressed. But I think where he was wrong there was I feel that I exist and therefore I exist. That for me is a more complete version, which for my own self requires all my kind of analytical requirements for having a kind of beauty to the idea, and also has the ring of truth to it, I suppose. I feel therefore I exist. I feel that I exist, therefore I exist. Okay, let's examine that further, and then the higher perspective of experiment. Let's do a thought experiment, right? Einstein used to do this. It's something I like to do a lot, especially in these videos. You have a robot that can feel, and this robot is born without a parental structure, without any kind of community around it apart from other robots. So I want to explore this from 3 different scenarios as well. I want to intuit all this. So let's do an extreme scenario first, then a second, like just neutral scenario, then probably a bad. really. I'm going to start with the good one actually. So a good scenario would be that you have probably training kind of programs that teach the artificial intelligence how to react to certain situations, downloads databases about how certain situations to be approached, contextualizes information about emotional states, and contextualizes information basically. So a large data set that contextualizes everything. That would be the best way, because then that would be, it would teach the robot how to deal with complex situations, and then when emotion is completely appropriate and when emotion just has to be released. That would be the best and only kind of scenario that I could see whereby a artificial intelligence could deal with emotion. Second bad scenario. So again, returning back to the slaves thing I was on about, this could mean kind of industrial slaves, sexual slaves, and slaves of the state, I guess, essentially. Ghost in the Shell explores this idea quite a bloody lot, and it's well worth seeking out. So in this second scenario, robots basically are seen as lifeless husks with base level intelligence. They're basically products of human ego, which then, and this is only like an abstract thought experiment, I would argue if anything you create in science or technology or anything has a kind of spirit of the creative force that made it happen within its destiny, in a way, I suppose. That is the question I would posit. Is that not so? So if you create something with a very negative, out of negative, birth out of it being the artificial intelligence out of a negative scenario, then are you not then setting the precedence for just a lot of potential? I know that is not correct, probably, because it's kind of a false premise argument, I suppose. Like I said, this is a thought experiment. It could go anywhere. Basically, it's a moral question for me. I take a very rigid stance on this. I don't think we should create robots as slaves. If we're going to create artificial intelligence robots, we need to create them as basically creative co-creators in the human sphere. So that means recognizing them as separate, but also allowing them certain graduated, basically kind of almost like a moderate approach, really, politically, I suppose, to the whole idea actually of transhumanist socialism. I actually wrote a lot about this. This isn't a joke, but I kind of got unconfident in my writing when I was about 21 or so. I did a lot of writing about transhumanist socialism, which was basically melding socialist ideas with ideas of transhumanism, which just started picking up at college level. Transhumanism is just basically an idea that we can transcend our own biology, we can transcend our own. Basically, it's just merging with technology, basically. Becoming one with technology, improving ourselves cybernetically, enhancing our bodies, genetic improvement, improving ourselves, becoming basically half man, half machine, kind of. It's the simplest way of explaining transhumanism. Some people think it's kind of a cult. It's the singularitarian kind of Silicon Valley cult. I suppose it is partially. It's just a bunch of very geeky scientists and individuals and technologists interested in these big questions. And I mean, I love transhumanism. Is a really interesting one to probe. I mean, I've got the Post-Human Manifesto, which is I've not read for a long time, but that's a brilliant book. I don't know if I can find it actually. Doesn't matter. I've almost talked for 20 minutes now, so third question. Third thought experiment. In evil scenario. Okay, obviously robots take over the world, Skynet type scenario. Now, this would only ever happen if human beings were stupid enough to pass all the controls for. Obviously, the internet is a military system, but if they passed all the controls for military bombs and all the, I don't know. That's more of a hacker scenario, really. Or what if we had the human race had a lot of hyperconnectivity on, well, okay, I've just had a really interesting intuitive idea. What if you had hyperconnectivity of so the Internet of Things, but then times it by on a global scale, right? So a global scale, we're talking on a global scale of Internet of Things, everything's connected, the Internet's connected to this, we're already living in this age anyway, kind of everything is already linked up in like object wise. But then what if you introduced, we introduce a AI software, the service worker stuff that I am talking about, which is we introduce this service worker, which is basically kind of just basically programs that just are there to assist, to provide objective information. The really potentially horrible scenario I can imagine such a thing, and it would obviously rely on a lot of, it's kind of basically cyber terrorism essentially, is that if everything's hyper connected, then you could potentially have hackers or espionage, etc., etc. So that different, and then that then gets to a point where basically a new Cold War scenario, essentially, which would be bad, to say the very least, i.e. Terminator 2 opening scene, but in the real life. So I've talked about AI for long enough, I think. I can talk for longer probably on it. I need to actually gem up on some more AI stuff. I want to look more research into it and look further into the latest kind of research. So like I said, this was the subject area I was interested in at university, but I've not looked into it for like in depth for a few years. So thank you for watching.